ultimately we have to decide for ourselves what is the best thing for us. And that's by removing all that noise, removing all those distractions, and then caring for ourselves.
Welcome to the SItuAsian Room, a journey into Asian America. We dive deep into the issues in the Asian American community, from questions like where are you really from, and representation, to sharing food and our own experiences. My name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach. This episode includes part one of our two-part interview with Dr. Calvin D. Sung, a New York City physician in emergency medicine. We discussed the coronavirus pandemic, his own experiences as a doctor and as an Asian American, mental health, and being comfortable with the uncomfortable, with so much more. So stay tuned. Coming up, we'll dish it out first with some Asian cuisines.
Welcome back to the Dish It Out table. So last time, Zach and I brought some really awesome dishes from our own cultures to the Dish It Out table. But this week, we're going to be exploring different dishes in the Asian American and Pacific Island community. So Zach actually challenged me to do some research on Vietnamese pork chops. And I'm so excited because I love this dish. I get this every time, or I don't. My parents normally get the pork chops when we go to a Vietnamese restaurant. But so what is it? It's just the classic, Vietnamese twist on pork chops. It's one of the more popular dishes that's served in Vietnamese cuisine. It has this amazing marinade of, garlic and lemongrass they marinate the pork chops in, and I do believe sometimes they also top it off with it so that it has that strong flavor and aroma when it comes to the table. And it's also topped with a mixture of scallions or green onions and some sort of like vegetable or canola oil. And then it's usually served with a side of rice, some vegetables, and a fish sauce to dip it in. And I love the fish sauce with it. I think it takes the whole dish to a whole new level.
You can't not have the fish sauce.
It's essential. But yeah, growing up, my family would always go to the Vietnamese restaurant, and my dad and my sister would actually order the Vietnamese style pork chops and rice combo. And I was guilty of always stealing a little bit from my dad's plate because I can't choose. You can't expect me to go to a Vietnamese restaurant and choose between pho and the pork chops because they're two amazing dishes. And I always go for the pho because I like my soup. I need to have pho.
It's so good. I mean, it's hard to pick something when you go there, and all the portion sizes are pretty big. Usually when you order like the pork chop, there's like two of them. I mean, they're fairly thin, but it's just a lot. So that's my default order for Vietnamese restaurants ever since I was like 2. I absolutely love them. They're an all-time favorite.
Because the portions are so big, I have zero guilt stealing the pork chop from my dad's plate because I'll steal a little bit of his pork chop and he'll steal a little bit of my pho, and everyone's happy. But this dish, what I love about it is the marinade really just takes that pork chop to a whole new level. Like I said before, you can see it coming from the kitchen to your table, and I can just taste this as I'm talking about it. But this packs so much flavor, and the aroma is incredible, and it's because of that lemongrass component. Mm-hmm. Like it provides a different twist to something classic like the pork chop.
Yeah, and when actually making the marinade, when I've made it, when you use like the lemongrass and shallots, it's very potent. The marinade's super potent, so like your face kind of stings when making it, but it's well worth it.
Oh, yeah. And that's how you get that, the aroma. Like if you guys haven't had this dish before, when you order the Vietnamese pork chops, as soon as, you get your plate, immediately you get that strong smell of the marinade of the pork chop. And that's the garlic and lemongrass, because they're two very strong flavors. So put them in one dish and it's a whole new experience.
Now, hot take, their Vietnamese pork chops are better than American pork chops because they're never dry.
100%.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good like transition food for like people who are very accustomed to like Western diets into
Hmm.
different types of Asian food. I
Yeah.
feel like pork chops are a good transition.
Yeah, my sister's she is a fairly picky eater. So, it took us a while for her to try pho. But the pork chop, because it's, pork chop and rice, so it's such a simple dish, but has that, different taste to it because it is a Vietnamese style dish. My sister loved it. That's why she orders it every single time. But okay, moving on. Zach, I actually challenged you to do some research on pisua.
Yes, so pisua is a Samoan dessert. It's made from tapioca and it's got like a raw, or no, what's has a syrup on top of it that's made out of like raw sugar, coconut cream, a little bit of lemon, and it's usually served as like maybe an afternoon snack and in a clear bowl. It looks damn good. So I mean, like the tapioca pearls are like the base, and they're all like melted together. So it's similar to what you'd put in boba. Um, and I am upset that I don't have the opportunity to try it. But it's a fairly simple thing, so maybe I'll try to make it. Um, it looks amazing.
Yeah, there's actually a Filipino dessert that is very similar to pisua. It's called uh, sago, and sago means tapioca in Tagalog, but it's pretty much the same thing. It's those tapioca pearls. It's brown sugar and water that it's more from how my family prepares it. It's syrupy, but it's not too thick. It's kind of like a drink.
Okay.
Um, and it's served. We serve it in cups with a spoon, and we will eat the tapioca pearls with the spoon, and we'll drink that brown sugar water syrup drink like kind of thing as
Hmm.
we're eating it.
Yeah.
It's super. It's sweet. It's delicious. In a lot of you know Pacific Island cultures where you're in the tropics, this is definitely one of the more refreshing desserts that people will go for. It's amazing.
I gotta start trying these. But so, I mean, the purpose of Dish It Out is to share cuisines from Asian American Pacific Islander culture because we believe that a dish is better if you share it. And so, if you, our listeners, have any recipes you'd like to share, send it to us on social media or through our website, and we'd love to bring your recipes to the Dish It Out table.
Well, that wraps it up for this episode's Dish It Out segment.
And the purpose of Dish It Out is to share cuisines from Asian American Pacific Islander culture because we believe that a dish is better if you share. If you have any recipes you'd like to share, send it to us on social media or through our website, and we'd love to bring your dishes and recipes to the Dish It Out table.
Yes, guys, please don't forget to check out our website. Check out the Dish It Out segment to find some amazing recipes. But hang tight. Coming up next, we have our interview with Dr. Calvin D. Sun.
Welcome back, and for this episode, we have a very special guest in the SItuAsian Room. Welcome, Dr. Calvin Sun. So tell us about yourself, your involvement in the AAPI community, the Monsoon Diaries, and your job.
Oh, that's a mouthful. I'm going to be talking for the next hour. Hi, my name is Calvin Sun. I am a New York City born and raised emergency room doctor that working per diem, credentialed at the majority of hospital systems in the New York City area. I work whenever and wherever I want. That's by choice. And it's because I run a travel blog at the side called the Monsoon Diaries, which is something I started back in medical school about 10 years ago. And it was just an experiment just to see how many how many countries I can travel to in the 4 years of medical school and 4 years of residency. And then along the way, like Forrest Gump, I ended up creating accidentally a travel community of thousands of other travelers that have come along with me to over 150 countries since. And now it's this self-run community slash travel company. I don't know what it is, but it's somehow intersecting with my life as a doctor as well. And one could not exist without the other.
That's awesome. So can you tell us about like what kind of stuff you've done for the AAPI community? Because I know you're very involved.
I have a lot of those monsooners I have brought along and hail from the social political experience and the work that I've done since I was in high school, and part of that network and friends of their friends have also joined along. I have served on, more specifically, I've served as a board of director on ICASU, the East Coast Asian American Student Union, from, I think I started getting involved in 2005, and I actually have been presenting at the conference up until 2019, but specifically on the board up until 2016.
Wow. I remember I actually met you, Calvin, at ICASU 2019 when it was in Orlando. Um, you held that workshop, Why You No Doctor Yet? And I just want to say, I want to tell all of our viewers, like, his workshop helped me so much with trying to find my right path. If you guys ever do check out ICASU or the East Coast Asian American Student Union, definitely it's an awesome experience. But yeah, we're so excited to have you for this episode, Calvin.
Thank you for saying that. That means a lot to me. I'm glad I could help in any way.
Yeah. So going back to ICASU and that one workshop that you run, you focus on teaching AAPIs the importance of mental health, and something that you teach a lot about is radical self-care. Can you tell us a little bit about what radical self-care is?
Sure. And the whole word teaching, that makes me feel like I have a major imposter syndrome, but part of me feels like I don't want more teach, but relate like my experiences and create a canvas for other Asian Americans to, also relate to and take away what works for them. I don't want to force my views on anyone. I don't want to proselytize. I want people to really come up with their own definition, and therefore they can own it. But we can use teach. I'm flattered. And if it's on the concept of radical self-care, it's very important I say that because that's how you want to define it. How I define it, and whatever you want to take away from it, is that there's this concept as people of color, minorities, or whatever identity you want to identify as, whether it's person of color, minority, women, queer, LGBTQ, trans, religious, cultural, able, disabled, all those things have some kind of baggage to them. And especially if you're one of these minority groups or you have an intersection of those minority groups, you're kind of just growing up throughout this country being told and socialized to believe in a certain way, so that the people who are teaching these things want to either keep you in place or even have better intentions, such as your parents, your guardians, who want you to be safe. As a woman, you shouldn't do this. As an Asian, you shouldn't do this. As this, you shouldn't do this because they will come for you or your life will be much harder. Even like I was born left-handed and my dad was like, nope, can't be left-handed. You have to be right-handed because your life will be very difficult. That's like an example of me just going through life, coming out of the womb, thinking that the world was, had endless possibilities, and then immediately telling me that I can't be left-handed. So they're trying to protect us. They have good intentions, but ultimately we have to decide for ourselves what is the best thing for us. And that's by removing all that noise, removing all those distractions, and then caring for ourselves, being able to start from scratch and saying what are these things that I do? Are these habits really coming from me, or is it socialized by somebody else, an institution, my guardians, my parents, a dead white institution? You really don't know unless you really focus on yourself first. And that means cutting out all the other people that you think that you're supposed to take care of, especially what we all know, the gender idea of a woman needs to take care of a man, or a person of color needs to educate a white person about what it means to be a person of color. All those things are exhausting after a lifetime of being told what to do, or what some people consider that oppression. Whatever it is, it sucks a lot of energy out. And if you start redirecting energy back on yourself and say, hey, I need to teach myself and take care of myself, and I don't have time to teach everyone else, just give me that space, that's considered radical. The whole society will say, hey, that's not what we want you to do. We want you to take care of society. We want you to give back to society, or all these things, pay your taxes, things like that. And I'm not saying don't pay your taxes, but I'm also saying that the concept of focusing yourself already is what they call slippery slope by considered a slippery slope by society. We give it names like self-care, mental health care. But a lot of society gets nervous when a whole group of people of color especially, got together and said, I'm not going to educate everyone. You have to educate yourself. We're going to take care of ourselves. And therefore, it's an act of political warfare. It's saying, screw you and this, socialization, that we need to educate you and take care of you.
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with those bigger groups, like, people of color, AAPIs, whatever group that you identify with. There are, different, I guess, like, I don't want to say threats. I think threats is a bit of a strong word, but there are different aspects, that we feel are, important to, like, for our own, as well as to teach, in terms of like radical self-care. And I like that you mentioned that for groups, different stereotypes, different like things that we have that we associate with these groups that we identify with. When you said that, we should, like, it's almost like our obligation to teach other people about us and about, our thoughts, our views and all that stuff. But a question that I had was, how would you describe, mental health in the Asian American Pacific Islander community? Or more so like the greatest threats to mental health in this, community, and how, we can take that radical self-care that you just explained and apply it to certain issues?
It depends on the subsect of Asian American diaspora that you speak to. There's some segments of Asian Americanism or the Asian American diaspora that have more privilege than other Asian Americans. If you're Southeast Asian versus South Asian versus East Asian, and then you slice and dice even further about different socioeconomic advantages that some subgroups have that other groups don't have. And they all suffer through different kind of mental health issues that I can't really say in one sentence encompass all of them, other than the fact that it's very complicated and it's discussed. It's under discussed by and large because it's so complicated. And whether it's the pressure of the model minority to do something or be something that you don't necessarily want to be or do, or is it just a struggle to put food on the table, or is it the word of being undocumented and whether you're going to stay in this country, every day you're wondering if you can put food on the table, or it's socioeconomic disadvantages, or if you are considered black and brown and people don't really, you're racially ambiguous, or if you come from a family that's very patriarchal, or you have a family that has no father in the house. There, all those things pertain to being Asian American, let alone we haven't gotten started about the internalized trauma we have had as Asian Americans, as children of immigrants, that's been encoded into our DNA. And I say that figuratively and literally, because we actually do know as a medical doctor, this is not, weird science, but it's true that a generation that goes through collective trauma, like a famine, right, or a Holocaust, that actually, it gets encoded in your DNA, that experience, so that your children makes up for that or has to experience it in some different way. Like, for example, famine, people who go through that, their children ends up storing more adipose tissue as fat because the bodies of the people who went through famine, or they traumatized the DNA so much. It's like, oh my God, we need to, store more fat because there could be next famine. They don't know. Examples like that. And in trauma, in like mental health, that is considered genetic. If you've come from a family that struggle with mental health issues, you are more likely to. I'm not saying it's a black and white issue. It's just probability. So Asian Americans, I don't want to create a brushstroke that says that all Asian Americans go through this, but I think that there is a huge trend that should be discussed, and that is that we're not discussing it enough. And I think that's like the most common language I can say without I don't want to be too general for the Asian American community. We're a complex group. So I think they deserve more surgery, nuanced surgery than a sledgehammer.
So, on the topic of like mental state, we want to talk about you. And so you and your colleagues in the ER have been put through hell these past few months. And can you walk us through like what did a day in March and April look like versus what does a day at work look like now? And how did you try to keep it all together during that time?
I would say that it differed week by week in terms of the kind of experiences that I felt were overwhelming. And when I started my first shift with COVID-19, or at least had my first COVID-19 patient, it was literally the morning after I had landed after a 2-week trip in West Africa that I was
Oh,
COVID.
wow.
And yeah, I landed at 4 p.m. in Newark Airport, and nobody screened me or anything. I came from West Africa, Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, Ebola territory. And then even then, they didn't care, and nobody screened me. They said, welcome home. Got home at 6 p.m., went to bed by like 8, and that was March 7th. And then by 7 a.m., March 8th, I was starting my first shift, and we already had COVID patients. And that's really, it was, I don't know how to say the word great, I could use that word, but it's great timing that I was really there when things started to ramp up. So the first week were all these COVID-19 rule out patients. And what I mean by that is that we didn't have enough tests. We didn't know if they had COVID-19. They had no symptoms at all. They were exposed and they were worried, and they were coming to the ER, and they were crowding our emergency room waiting rooms and the emergency room itself, looking for tests that didn't exist. And let's say if they're there for a legitimate concern that had COVID-19, if it's been around since February, January, December, what it is, they're giving it to one another in the emergency room, because the emergency room isn't like an outdoor space. It's a crowded indoor space with no airflow, and they're exposing it to us when we didn't have enough PPE. And it takes about 20 minutes to find an N95 usually, which is more of an annoying thing. And then if you didn't want to wait for it, you just get the flu. You go in and you get diarrhea. And I've done plenty of shifts where I hooked myself in the IV and solved more patients. That was like the worst that could happen. Now with COVID-19, this new disease, somebody told us that we're going to die from it as healthcare workers, because they were dying in China and Europe. So we were like struggling to find PPE to protect ourselves from this supposed patient population that looked great, that may or may not have COVID-19, just to tell them that we didn't have tests. Or once we did have tests, was it to send it to LabCorp? Was it sent to the Department of Health? Was it, in-house? No, we didn't have any of the machines. It wasn't like one day everything came in. It was like a slow day by day, like what the hell is going on? And then week 2, they started having symptoms, probably from coming to the emergency room a week before, giving it to one another when they could have stayed home and not overwhelmed us, but they did, coming with symptoms, but they were like healthy enough. They looked great. They were people I would have sent home anyway, but for an unknown disease, nobody knew. And I'm just one doctor. What are the other doctors who are a little more conservative and scared of, sending people home more than I am? I'm more like getting the patients to coordinate and take care of themselves, and they know when to come back, giving them very good instructions, because I sometimes, with some patients, I may feel they are worse off at the hospital, because we knew at the time that it had something to do with viral load. The more viral exposure you have to other sick patients, the more likely you're going to die. Maybe it's safer to be at home, but if you're at home, you don't have oxygen. So silent hypoxia was not known at the time, but people died suddenly without oxygen. Maybe you should be in the hospital. But then, even then, and we want to talk about mental health, was the dilemma, the medical ethical dilemma that we all had to struggle with per patient. So something that, like, do you go home or do you stay here? What's going on at home? And we struggled with that decision. And other doctors who were more scared, and admitted patients to the hospital, find out that the patient died, and they would find out about me, which I'm a little, more like, you need to be home. You look great and you have a good support system. Then I think you're better at home. We decide together. Most of the patients sent home, I think all of them, to my knowledge, are still alive. And what about that guilt that people feel when they see that, and they say, oh, I should have sent that one home. I should have, one more life saved. Or, for me, like, I could also think that the person I sent home may have died, and maybe they should have been here. I mean, I can even play that to my grandfather, who died of COVID-19 in April. He died in the hospital when I asked him to stay at home. And people ask me, like, well, you shouldn't have been so aggressive and, telling him not to go to the hospital, because if he died. He could have died at home if you didn't send him, and you would have been even more distressed as a bad grandson had he not, like, had he not went to the hospital and actually listened to you. And I'm like, no, like, true, but no, he died at the hospital with 2 chest tubes in him, because they punctured his lung by giving him too much oxygen when he was doing just fine at home. And even if he were to die at home, I think my conscience would have been clear, because he would be at home with his wife for 60 years without 2 chest tubes inside him, without a transfusion, dying peacefully, instead of being surrounded by complete, like, doctors, strangers who dressed like astronauts, not being able to be with his wife underneath an unfamiliar ceiling with 2 chest tubes inside of him. Like, you don't know. Like, this whole long answer is to illustrate, like, how devastating COVID-19 was for us on a patient by patient basis, just within the first 2 weeks. I haven't even gone to week 3, where patients started coming in really sick and they had to stay in the hospital. But we didn't have room, because all the other doctors that admitted all the patients that looked well already got beds in the hospital, because we didn't know enough. stayed at the hospital. Now the patients who really needed the bed waited up to 88 hours or 125 hours for a bed, you know?
Yeah.
And then week 4, when they waited 125 hours is a few days, right? And then that's week 4, and they're still in the emergency room, and they're all going to cardiac arrest. So people just die. I'm going to, and I start a shift with 3 dead bodies. I've done that before, but we knew that they were dead, you know? So all I had to do was to maybe, you know, wrap it up and register the death. But at that time, I went in starting a shift with the doctor that was overnight. Thought the patients were fine. And then when I checked out them after 5 minutes of speaking about these patients to, like, you know, check out a CAT scan, check an x-ray, I found out they were dead. And because of that, we had scenarios where people died in the waiting room. And I had to resuscitate them, drag them out of the waiting room and bring them back to life, only to find them dead 2 days later anyway. That's like week 4, week 5. I mean, that's a long answer, but I mean, it's always shifting in terms of what we had to deal with. And then I even talked about ourselves. What about the lack of PPE?
Mm-hmm.
What about waking up every day wondering we've got a fever? Knowing that, you know, it's 25 days, up to 25 days of, you know, no symptoms to know sure that you're in the clear after an exposure. But, you know, I'm exposed every day. So I have to add 25 days to every time I go to work just to make sure I don't have a fever. That's like a soldier going to war, getting shot, but then having to wait 25 days in the battlefield and wondering if he actually got shots before he can go home. I don't want to minimize that experience, but once you get shot in war, you know you're going home that day.
Yeah.
We didn't have that luxury in, you know, I hate that word, I guess, luxury, if you want to use that comparing to war, but we got exposed, we got shot, but we had to wait 25 days and we still had to go in every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for your loss, but yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. So how is that from the worst? How does it look now versus today? What are there any changes that have happened? Because I know New York, you know, in the state of it being you know, July right now, New York seems to have the best grip on it. New York and New Jersey versus all the other states in the union.
No, it's night and day. It's right now we're pretty much on vacation, if you will. There no shifts, very few shifts for me to work. I'm grateful, and I am still working and have jobs because I'm friends with everyone in most of the hospitals in New York. So they're giving me shifts to work so that I don't, like, completely forget how to be a doctor again. But by and large, most of the people are not even asked to come in anymore because there are no patients. There are very few. I think we're ramping up again with the bread and butter patients, but there's still a lot of the patient population who's too scared to go to the emergency room. And technically, this was an issue we had addressed even before COVID-19, where there were already too many patients coming to the emergency room for the wrong reasons. Right before COVID-19 and pandemic, so many patients were coming in because they wanted a med refill, or they wanted to get a work note, or they, you know, wanted certain medications that we didn't have, that their doctor wouldn't give or something, and they were expecting the emergency room to give it, or things like that, where it was being abused. And because of that, we were not being able to pick out as effectively the ones who were truly sick. It was a free-for-all system. And I'm not saying you shouldn't go to the emergency room. Go to the emergency room. I'm trained to take care of you no matter what. I won't complain. But I was concerned about the system collapsing, where all those patients that didn't necessarily need the emergency room were overshadowing those who had heart attacks that were being super polite, sitting there and sitting on a heart attack, and we couldn't get to them in time because the one that's screaming for a work note will get the more attention. But it was a thing that we became really good at treating. For example, as an emergency doctor, I trained in a program that taught me to literally look at someone across the room and know if they're sick. I don't know why, don't know how, but I just that skill of being a Jedi is something that a really good emergency room doctor who goes to a good program can able to suss. I mean, it's not always a perfect science, but we needed that because there were just so many patients. And on top of that, pandemic almost collapsed our system.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing when I talked about, like, don't go to the emergency room if you're feeling fine and all you want is a test, because you're more likely going to catch it in the emergency room waiting for a test and then go back with a false sense of reassurance because it takes 2 to 3 days for your test result to come back. So you have caught it. By the time they test you, it's not going to be positive anyway. So you're going to get a phone call 2 days later and say it's negative. You feel like it's great, but you actually had caught it on the way home, whether it was a subway or something, or your neighbor. And then you hug grandma, hey, I'm negative, and give her the virus, and she dies because of you. So that was what it's like before. And now in New York, it's completely opposite, where we're worried that the people with heart attacks and strokes are not coming in at all. And they're coming in end stage when it's already too late. I think my friend who's a hematologist, oncologist, telling me that all they're getting in the emergency room when she gets consulted are end stage cancer patients who were supposed to get treatment but didn't, and now is on death's door because their cancer was treated too late because they were so scared of catching COVID-19. And to no fault of their own, If they had come earlier, they probably got treated for the cancer, but may have come in April when they needed it and then catch the virus and then die anyway. We don't know.
Mhm.
We don't have that multi-dimensional machine to really know for sure. So there's no really way to know, right? Even right now, when everything seems okay, we don't know what we don't know, right?
Mhm.
What about those patients out there that used to come on all the time with heart attacks? Where are they now? Are they dead at home? Are they dying from other things? Are they in other states? We will never know, because it's not like there's like a national tracking system for patients that should come in. We only see what we can see. So it is this sense of, the getting ready for that surge of like heart attacks and strokes, which, it's slowly creeping up, but I can't rule that out as a possibility. When it rains, it pours, they say in emergency rooms. And I really believe it. People will come in 3 at a time, 4 at a time, like a day, like today's a baby day. So everyone's coming in, just delivering babies in taxi cabs for some reason. Today's a gunshot day. Everyone's getting shot today. Today is appendicitis day, because the last 5 patients I had has confirmed acute appendicitis. Like, that is something that has happened before COVID-19, and we are bracing for that happening after this wave.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What I'm curious is like, how do your people in the front lines, especially those that work in the ER, are you guys mentally prepared for that usually, or like pre-COVID? Because you're talking about all these days where it's just especially bad or a certain thing. Can someone even mentally prepare themselves for a toll like that?
It really depends on the person. And we even talked about the whole Asian American mental health access. Like neglected to mention that one of the hardest things as an Asian American to seek for mental health is to see a fellow therapist that is Asian American, that looks like them, that eats even eats their food. I say that, like, if you're struggling with eating disorders, for example, finding a nutritionist that knows Asian food,
Yeah.
it's luck with that. And that's just an example of, finding somebody with your perceived the struggles and able to identify with that and able to, speak to that. And if they're not Asian American, then you're going to have a tough time finding a therapist that you can relate to. Not to say you shouldn't, but it's just, that's a struggle, because it's just a numbers game of Asian Americans, and a lot of them not going into mental health counseling, at least in our previous generation. And we're starting to get better now. But that's the same thing, that same answer applies to your question. And our doctors are the type of people to have the right counselors. Who's to say this patient population being doctors are even willing to seek advice? This was a pandemic way before COVID-19, where doctors were committing suicide at twice the national average, at a rate that was twice the national average. Doctors were committing suicide, and this was way before COVID-19. What do you think is going to happen after this pandemic, when some of our colleagues even died? When we had H1N1 and SARS, the doctors that took care of the initial set of patients that came in with those in the United States of America, the ICU doctors and the nurses all quit afterwards. I mean, they took care of the patients, discharged them. It was, they popped the champagne, everyone celebrated. We beat H1N1, SARS, and all the doctors and nurses from that ICU, I know, quit because they were so traumatized from the experience. What do you think is going to happen after COVID-19 is all over? We're still getting to the game where none of us are quitting now, because we need to put food on the table. I need to pay off my student loans. We need the money. But after the whole come down, after the vaccine, and we start watching Netflix documentaries on, what it was like, and it becomes a History Channel thing. The reckoning among doctors, especially Asian American doctors, is, did we really seek the help? What about us? Did they take care of us? And it's also tough because we live in a country where they were laying off doctors in other parts of the country even before the pandemic reached them. They were looking at New York as like, well, this is bad. Maybe we should get ready for a pandemic. And in response to that, they decided to lay off all the doctors and nurses, because like, we don't have enough money to pay you. That doesn't make any sense to me, unless you are working with a system that is unsustainable and relies heavily on payment plans that derive from elective surgeries. But they were canceling elective surgeries everywhere because none of the people who wanted to go into, going for surgery, come out with COVID-19, let alone expose the surgeons to the virus. So all that money was gone. And as a result, they laid off all their doctors and nurses way before a pandemic hit. And now a pandemic has hit, and they're like, oh, come back. But what now? It's just like that does a number on the mental health of doctors who feel that we've been treated like commodities, been thrown under the bus. And of course, like, let alone like living in a society where they're all saying that all these doctors are, overreacted, and, now we have too many ventilators and too many tests, which is not a thing that people should be saying, because we don't have enough tests still. But yeah, too many ventilators. New York is doing great. It was all a scam or a hoax and whatnot. And would you rather have the opposite? would you rather have us be too correct and actually have everything we warned about come true, where you did run out of ventilators? Then that scenario would mean I would have to decide whether you get to live or you get to die. Oh, I'm young. Okay, fine. Then your immunocompromised friend or your mom or your dad and your grandfather, your grandmother, then you're going to give me the choice to have, oh, there's only one ventilator left. Who should I give it to? And you're on the table that I have to decide, or your family member, your loved one. Would you rather have that? No, nobody would rather have that. And that's our moral injury, that the scenario that actually did happen when we did all these creative things, not to ventilate everybody, not to intubate everyone by saying intubation is harmful, create a closed circuit CPAP. We did MacGyver-ish like medical management stuff just so we could just get by. And now everyone's saying we overreacted. Well, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I actually prefer being thrown on the bus and being accused of overreacting than the opposite scenario where I have to decide whether you get to live or you get to die. What do you want us to be? And that's our moral injury, that we actually choose the one where we get thrown on the bus. There's no way to winning. And that's essentially, I think I'm a little more ahead of the game in mental health because I'm aware of this. As you can see that I'm constantly putting this in front of me, so I'm aware of the problem. But there are plenty of other physicians and healthcare workers who don't verbalize this, who don't put this out in front of the table to see it out like, the cards on the table or piano keys where they can see the problem. Because that's always step one. Like, what is nagging on me? What is this issue? I'm verbalizing it all right now. So hopefully other people who are listening can actually like, oh yeah, like that's what I've been thinking the whole time. But then I realized when I'm going through this, not everyone heals by talking. Not everyone heals by talking about it. And that's okay too. Everyone heals in different ways. But I worry that, are we providing them enough resources and outlets for them to heal their own way? Are they even aware of how they heal? And I hope it's not, substance abuse or, drug use or alcohol, wanting something more sustainable, like, counseling and talking about it. But if it's not that, what is it? Going to the gym? We don't have gyms. Boxing gym, punching a pillow. Traveling, we can't travel. So it's very difficult. And then there's no really right answer to your question other than it's very complex. And I hope my very long-winded answer is more of a show don't tell. Like the answer in itself that I just gave shows you the actual answer, which is very meta, but it's complicated.
Yeah. So, a lot of what you said falls, I think, under the theme of pressures that people face, especially Asian Americans, doctors. And so I want to know, like, growing up, I know you faced a lot of different pressures from a lot of the different speeches you've done in the past, from your parents who were adamant about you becoming a doctor, and, the pressure of competitive environments, like being in Columbia Med School and residency. And I'm curious, like, what are the most challenging pressures you faced, and what role did radical self-care help you in dealing with these pressures?
So those of you who don't know my story, I lost a bet, which led me to travel, because at the time I hated the idea of traveling. But I'm a man of my word, and if I lose a bet, I'll fulfill the obligations of the bet. And that led me to the second bet of applying to every medical school at the time. And I did not want to go to med school because I knew that's something my dad and my mom wanted me to do. And after my dad died and my mom got sick, I was actually free to do whatever I wanted. But then I realized the rebellion of not going to medical school was an act of rebellion that was influenced by my parents. And what if I'm actually meant to be a doctor, but I'm rebelling against the whole time? And then they win. Then the stereotype of being an Asian American doctor still wins over me. I'm doing something because of something. Or rather, I'm not doing something, which is an action, because of something. And I don't want to be like that. It has to come from me. And that's when the bet came in play, where I wasn't sure, and obviously don't recommend to everybody, but if you're in a place where you're not sure, sometimes doing something is better than doing nothing at all. And if I were to not get anywhere in medical school, it was to check off that box, no, I'm not meant to be, and then put an end to that. And that would be the beginning of my new chapter in my life. I ended up getting to a single medical school, and I wasn't sure if I was meant to be a doctor. I'm grateful for that opportunity, but I decided to do it while not sacrificing all the other things at the time, which was the travel part of my life that awakened in me because of the previous bet. And that goes to show you that I always embrace the uncomfortable. I've made into a habit of being comfortable with embracing the uncomfortable so that I'll never be caught off guard or as caught off guard again with personal tragedies and trauma. When my dad died, I was 19 years old in 2006, and that completely took me by surprise. And my mom got Parkinson's afterwards, or like a formally diagnosed. We kind of knew, but then it was just like official. And my girlfriend broke up with me at my dad's funeral a week later, and it was on Father's Day. So like that summer of 2006 was the worst, But the way I reframe it, also the best summer of my life, because it taught me that this is life. No one's immune from it. No one is immune from all these tragedies. It's just not a matter of if, but a matter of when. And next time, I want to be as prepared as possible. And that means running towards the fire instead of running away from it so that it can't find me. It will find you. So you might as well just face it head on earlier than later. And that's when I did all those bets. That's when I decided to go into medical school, not knowing if I truly was meant to be, but also not sacrificing other things that I was doing at the time. ICASU, Columbia College Young Alumni stuff, and the social justice stuff, the real estate that I was starting all these little things, and bartending and DJing and dancing. Like, I wanted to keep doing all those things. I was known to not give up on anything. And the goal was to actually just embrace so much of that discomfort and trying to do everything as much as possible, that the ones that are truly meant to be in my life will stick, and the ones that weren't will fail me out. And hope that was the second goal. Is like, if I fail out of medical school, if they kick me out, then I can check that box off and start a new chapter in my life. And they did. There was 3 times where I almost got kicked out, but every time they rounded me up, because they said, like, you're so different, you're an interesting person, and you're an inspiration to our class, you're class president, you're doing a lot of work for us, unpaid, and we, want to do all those things. But they didn't expect me to get into residency, become a doctor. But again, I always embrace the uncomfortable. That's what worked for me. And I applied anyway, because, the hope was eventually get rejected everywhere, have my, Oprah story or Anna Wintour story, like I failed everything, or they fired me. And then I, began again. And that just didn't happen. Every time, like, I walked and talked to the dean of medicine or the dean of students, I knew they were just like, this is not going to work, because your academic record is trash. I got a 212 on step 1, my medical licensing exam. You need like a 230 to be competitive. So they say you better do better on step 2. At least we have different parts. So I got a 204. So I did worse. And then, of course, every dean is going to be like, it's going to work. But then they look at my whole record and it's like, you know what? I want to support you, because we gave you a shot. You are the imposter. We do want doctors as human beings, not as people who study from books all the time. It is part of the narrative of us trying to change of what it means to be a doctor. And you represent that, and we're going to support you. But you better study hard in residency. And it's just like a pattern of things where I just constantly was, given the choice of whether to do the more comfortable thing, to take the path of least resistance, say what they want to hear, do what they want you to do, right? What does this remind you of? What we talked about in the beginning of this podcast, the socialization. Do because everyone wants you to be as safe as possible. Everyone has good intentions. Study hard, don't travel. Fuck that. I decided to travel the world still. I remember getting 16 interviews for emergency medicine in my 4th year. And I was so grateful. And even the dean of students was like, this experiment worked. People actually like you based on a recommendation letter, despite all your shitty scores. But that's way below like the screening threshold, and you still like got interviews. You don't take this for granted. Go to an interview, and you basically you might have a chance to becoming a doctor still. And I had a once in a lifetime free trip to Antarctica, leading a group of 20 people in like the middle of all those interviews. And I'm like, no, I'm still going to go to the Antarctica trip. That's still priority. That's what has worked for me this whole time. And all my advisors thought I was crazy, but I emailed all of them. And I was like, hey, I have this once in a lifetime trip to Antarctica. I am not giving up on this. This is who I am. And if you can't reschedule me, then I guess we can't do the interview. And everyone thought I was nuts. Everyone rescheduled me. They was like, that's no problem. You'll just come a little earlier. Oh, come in January. You just have to ask. A lot of people just like, how did you get that? I was like, I emailed them. And they said, okay, sure. That's fine. Like, not everyone can make every date, so you come in January or come in November. I was like, hey, Halloween weekend is open. So I didn't, okay, fine. I didn't celebrate Halloween. I went that weekend and interviewed. And guess what? I ended up getting, one of the top emergency medicine residencies in the country. And just by being myself. Everyone knows the bartender story where they asked me like, there was like the final boss and they were like, are you sure you want to be a doctor? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, why? And I was like, well, I've been a bartender all my life. I'm still a bartender. And it's the closest thing to bartending I can think of. Because in an emergency room, you're behind a bar of computers. You never know who's going to come into the door. It's the same kind of people that you see in a bar. And you got to move as fast as possible, but not too fast because everyone wants that really nice drink, but you can't move too slowly either. And the person interviewing me, you're just like my bar manager. You don't do anything but make us work and just go around and asking people if they needed a Tylenol. And then telling me, give this guy, an Advil on the house before he goes. And they love that answer. It's just like every time I became myself and told the truth, kind of like what Governor Cuomo says, if you tell the truth, then the right people will, support you. The right people, they'll do the right thing. And I got into one of the best emergency medicine residencies in the country. And that was also another journey where they told me I shouldn't travel because it was making them look bad or making me look bad. I didn't care enough. So it was my third year of residency, and I didn't really I wasn't quite sure. I was kind of just getting the idea that this is what I wanted to do. I was actually really happy being a doctor, but at the same time, I was still traveling. I was up to 120 countries at this point. This med school, and they're just like, you're traveling too much. You're not writing any papers. You're not doing any presentations. You're not doing any research. You're just traveling all the time. And we're kind of concerned. I posted that email on my website, just like, we're going to kick you out because it seems like you rather run a travel company, and we're happy that we want to support you. It's just we don't know this is what you want to do. So did I stop traveling? No, I just hid them all on social media, so it looked like I stopped traveling, and I still traveled, still was myself, and they ended up making me kind of the wellness chief. Anyway, like this guy, they were going to get kicked out. They made me the wellness chief only because I applied to become chief. And because they were of that warning, they was like, this guy's never going to get chief. So I didn't get it. The 4 that did end up becoming chiefs got together and they were like, hey, we need to throw parties and, be social and, make our, residency program look, accommodating and, fun. And because we do have fun, but who's going to be responsible for organizing all this? Well, Calvin loves this stuff. And I was just actually emailing them saying, hey, if you need any help, I'll be glad to help. And they ended up making a 5th chief position, director of wellness. And then after I graduated, there were 5 chiefs instead of 4. So I guess that was that. So again, you can cut this up and edit as much as you like into different parts, but it's just saying that the most uncomfortable thing for a lot of people in terms of mental health is just being themselves. Because a lot of us are scared of ourselves and what we're capable of and what we're told that we should and shouldn't do. It's kind of like an X-Men movie or something, or some episode from any mutant movie ever, or superhero, or any superhero Marvel movie. Like, you are your own worst enemy. You're scared of yourself and the whole society is trying to bring you down. But once you embrace yourself, you do the uncomfortable thing, which is like the most obvious thing under your nose, is yourself, and start all over again. You develop a habit of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's very important in mental health. That you're being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I didn't say you get rid of the uncomfortable. That's a completely different statement. Oh, how'd you get rid of mental health? How'd you deal with your mental health and got rid of all your demons? I became comfortable with myself. That's a different advice that I'm not endorsing. I said I became comfortable with being uncomfortable, which means that the discomfort, the tragedy, the trauma, they're always going to be there. And you just have to accept that.
Thank you again to Dr. Calvin Sun for coming into the SItuAsian Room, and thank you guys for tuning into this episode. Make sure to stay tuned next week for part 2 of our interview. The SItuAsian Room is produced by Crimson Planet Media. Make sure to check out our website, SItuAsianRoom.com, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook at SItuAsian Room for more content.
We always want to hear from you guys, so send us messages and recipes through our website, slide into our DMs on Instagram, message us on Facebook, and let us know what you want us to talk about. But for now, thank you again for joining us on this step through our journey through Asian America. Once again, my name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach Gang. So, same time next week.
Yeah, we have to finish this interview.
That's right. That's right. This is a good interview. I'm excited for part 2. See you guys next time.
Bye, guys.
All right.